The history of web pages is such that browsers tend to be very forgiving of certain types of mistakes. If you miss a closing tag, it will often work the way you expected. It probably won't crash or ignore the document or give you up completely, but it might not appear quite the way you meant it to. Or maybe it does look like what you want, but you do not want to depend on that. In general, best practices would call for one. Because an HTML file essentially represents a tree structure, the open and close tags should always match, and there should not be any overlap with other elements. The two examples here are fine because in each case, either an element is wholly contained in another, example with this one, or they can completely separate, or such as this one here. This, on the other hand, is not valid. What happens in this case is what we call an undefined, because there is no telling how the browser will decide to handle it. It might decide to automatically close the p tag when when it sees another close tag, or it could complain about an unexpected close tag at the header. Then it might complain again where there is now an unexpected close p tag. Proper indentation is one way to make your code clearer and easier to understand. So the code here doesn't give any sense of structure of the document. So by using indentation effectively, you can make it more clear, showing the nesting of elements. Often, projects will have coding styles that everyone is expected to use so that everything looks consistent and developers can more easily read each other's code. So if you are creating the project, you can decide what the rules are, but unless there is a good reason to change away from typical practices, it is usually best to adopt them. Before we go any further, it is good to understand a few technical details. So first is that tags are case insensitive. So meaning to say, when you write the tag on lowercase letter or capital letter, they will be exactly the same kind of tag. And also, don't worry about too many white spaces. In HTML, most extra space will be ignored. So if there are extra white spaces, it generally doesn't matter and your result will look the same. So in these examples here, all three of these should look exactly the same when you read them in the browser. Here you'll see the use of capital letter in H1 tags, and also here with extra white spaces, and this one right here with lowercase letter H, and with no extra white spaces. These are all the same. So because it doesn't matter to the browser how much white space there is, you can use white space to make your code more visibly organized and easier to read. And then also, attributes are case sensitive. So if tags are case insensitive, attributes are case sensitive. So in this example, so these two elements will have different IDs because even though they are spelled the same, the different cases indicate different names. And the next is that any kind of quotes for strings. So strings are just a series of characters. They could be any characters like this one, holiday, or ABC 1 to 3. They can even contain spaces, as in, for example, this one. This is a string. So because they are so widely variable, the computer needs us to indicate where a string begins and ends, which is typically done with quotation marks. So either a single quotation marks or double quotation marks. So you will find that in places where HTML is expecting certain types of strings, so even if you do not use the quotation marks, it will essentially insert them for you. So in these examples, they are all equivalent. Either you use double quotation marks, single quotation mark, or no quotation marks at all. So it is important to know that in HTML, double and single quotes are almost interchangeable, but they have to match. You cannot use a single quote on one hand and the other is double quotes. So if you start a string with a double quote, such as with this one, the computer will not end it until it sees another double quote. Or if you use single quote, it will not end. The computer will not end it also until it sees another single quote. So, meaning to say, the best practice is to be consistent with your quotes. So, it's best to quote them all the way, even if the browser would understand it anyway. In summary, the idea here is to take advantage of these flexibilities to create clean, organized code that is easy for a human to comprehend or to read. To sum it all up, first is that case sensitive matters except when it doesn't. So case matters for some things like strings and attributes, but not others like tag names. And then white space is ignored except when it's not. So white space is used to separate things, but adding more than one space will be the same as just one. So white space in strings is always just as you type it. And then third, quotation marks are not part of a string, except when they are. So quotation marks enclose a string, but thanks to the flexibility of choice between single or double quotes, it is easy to include one or the other in your string. And lastly, the important thing is to look good. You can take advantage of flexibility in capitalization and white space to make your code more readable and organized.